Good evening. It is 5:30 PM on Tuesday, August 2nd. No,
16.
we have a typo here, August 16th, 2022. And this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Chairman John Hastings presiding. Also present are Commissioners Slate Camp, Luke Ahmed, Amelia Boyd, Ben McGran, Nick Polito. At this time, most uncle is expected. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance, if everyone will please join. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any general announcements from the commissioners or from city staff?
Mr. Chairman, just a reminder that you have a special meeting scheduled for next week to replace the September 6th Planning and Zoning Commission.
And time and date again?
It will be next Tuesday, 5:30 PM.
Tuesday. Gotcha. Thank you. Any others? Not. Next on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the meetings from that August 2nd meeting.
Moved.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes and the minutes are approved. For old business, the first item on the agenda this evening is an overview of and input on comprehensive plan draft chapters. And I will now yield the floor to City Planner Amy Tweeten for an introduction of this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, tonight we are we're continuing a review of draft chapters of the plan. And tonight we are talking about 3 chapters that had recently adopted master plans that also had a series of public engagement involved with them. So we thought we'd move these chapters forward first. Here in the room tonight is Parks Planning and Development Director Maeve Nevins-Lofton. Sorry. And again, because we have one of the Parks and Recreation chapter, she's done some initial review of that chapter, but she'll be involved in that as well. And then Heather Upton is our Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Officer. And so that community character chapter that goes over the master plan for arts, culture, and historic preservation incorporated a lot of that material as well. And then remotely, we have Miriam McGilvery from Logan Simpson. Miriam, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. So with that, and Fonda, City Attorney, is also remote. Hi, Fonda.
Hi.
So with that, I am going to turn it over to Miriam to kind of give us some background. She has been involved in this comprehensive plan process longer than I have. So give a little bit of background and an overview of the chapters where they are currently.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm so excited to be in front of you all again today, looking back at all of our materials that we'd been working through. It didn't look like we'd met until, the last time we met or I presented in front of this commission was April 2020. So it feels like a hot minute, and I'm really excited to be back in front of you. As Amy mentioned, I was part of the original comprehensive plan process since 2019. And so I am happy to walk through and remind everyone what we did a couple years ago, where we left off and where we're coming back in, and of the successes of that process to date. So I think we got really far, and we're only going to build on our successes. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can you see? Hopefully I'm sharing the right, nope, not sharing the right screen, am I? Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. It's strange when you have multiple monitors up. Okay, so as Amy mentioned, I'm going to give a quick project update, and then we're going to dig into the first set of chapters that we drafted, which are the chapters 3, 6, and 7, community character and design, multimodal transportation, and parks and recreation. But before we get into that, I do want to give you that project update. So originally, the comprehensive plan was a 3-phase process, with phase 1 being our foundation, where we kicked off the process. We had a robust community engagement plan, and we did a lot of that ground truthing of existing conditions, trends analysis, kind of understanding where Sandpoint is today and how those trends project into the future. Phase 2 was our shared vision, which is where we think big. We talk about what Sandpoint could and should be in the future. So visioning, and then we had community choices and priorities workshops, where we really dug into, okay, if this is our big direction, our big vision for our community, how do we get there? What are the strategies? What are the opportunities we need to really dig into? And where are those kind of conflicting points that we need to work out? So there was some of that cost benefit trade-off analysis, understanding how to approach all the facets of a community or a comprehensive plan, knowing that sometimes they can conflict. And then to round out phase 2 was an implementation management plan, looking at actions, how to hit the ground running with that understanding of where we want to go. So where we left off in 2020, we actually were firmly in phase 3. We did have all of the pieces and parts mostly pulled together for that preliminary plan. And we had been talking about how to bring this back out to the public for that public draft and public review. And that's really where we were told to put a hold on it. That was firmly into the pandemic at that point in 2020. So I want to say that we got pretty far. We had some really robust conversations with the community. We had 5 community events, almost 200 event participants, 8 online surveys. And of that, we got almost 800 survey responses. As part of the phase 1, we had 31 individual key informant interviews or stakeholder interviews. And we've also met with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We had a steering committee and city councils. So we had a pretty robust engagement and participation in that process early on. We were also tracking some of that participation by location and some other age demographics, to making sure that we really were hearing from a broad group of Sandpoint community members. So this is just an illustration in our engagement summary, which shows kind of that breakdown of what neighborhoods we heard from, where we had our events, and that kind of thing as an example. Before I get into the chapters, well, I want to pause here and see if there were any questions on process and participation to date before we jump into the content.
May I ask you a question? So in comparison to other cities where you've done this type of study, is this about the average participation that you see?
Well, so it really depends. I think this was a pretty good cross-section of the community. As you can see, we had all of the neighborhoods represented in our engagement. You can always do better. And I think a lot of communities were hit pretty hard with the pandemic in terms of having to pivot to online engagement or different ways to engage with the community. We were right at the cusp, and our Choices events happened in the winter right before the pandemic hit. So I think we still had some really good conversations, and even in that room you are in, those choices workshops, we had pretty good turnout, even from some younger crowd. There were some high school students that joined us that evening too. So it really depends, but I feel good about how the process has engaged the community to date.
My next question is, I've been reading through the report a little bit, but our community has changed significantly in this last few years. You know, these surveys and these engagements are pre-pandemic. We've evolved and changed post-pandemic. How accurate and relevant is it today from what we know now?
Well, that's a great point. And I think this, I probably went too fast on this slide, but what we are hoping to do is go back to phase one, go back to phase two, understand how the data has changed. So we can look at what's changed in the last 2 years. And then in phase two, we were really asking for the community's participation in how they envision their own community. And so you're absolutely right that this is a great opportunity to come back to the community and say, this is what we had established as our future vision for Sandpoint. Where are the gaps? Does it still feel right? Does it resonate with you? And how can we kind of tweak what we've already built on? So there probably are some values that haven't changed. And where can we build on that?
I have a question. On the pie chart, is it normal, in your opinion, to see more people from outside the community engaged in what's happening in Sandpoint, or?
Not always. Yeah, this was a little bit, 25% is quite a lot of folks in my experience. What I experienced through that public engagement effort was that everyone in the region felt like they had a vested interest in how Sandpoint develops, even though they weren't local residents. Because it is the county seat, it got a great downtown. It does feel like a cultural center for the region. That there were folks that live in surrounding municipalities or unincorporated Bonner County that did want to participate and kind of feel like they had a say. But we did want to make sure that we're showing that and calling that out here, because maybe local residents' voices should have more of a weight. So we wanted to be able to understand who was saying what, when, and where they were coming from, to be able to parse out whether someone else was speaking on behalf of a neighborhood when they shouldn't.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes.
So if you were to remove the 24%, which makes up the majority here, were opinions different?
That's a good analysis that we can look into. At this point, since I'm 2 years removed from the actual responses, I would have to take a second look at it. But we can do that cross section of the survey analysis. It's harder to track with the in-person engagement since we weren't tracking by comment, but the survey responses, we certainly can look at what that cross section looks like.
Any other questions?
No.
Continue.
Great question. Good. Okay, so I don't know if Amy has gone through a little bit of the structure for how this plan is going to be pulled together, but it's not different. It's not so different from what the current comprehensive plan looks like, in so much that we have an introduction, we have a vision chapter, and then all of the plan elements, all of the topics have their own chapters. And so it's very similar to what your existing comprehensive plan looks like. So digging into chapter 3, community character and design, this was really built on pulling in some of those existing conditions reports that we did in phase 1, updating them and making sure that they aligned with the planning efforts, the studies that have been done since then. So, we talk about historic places in that chapter, giving the context of the historic downtown, where there are National Register of Historic Places. We talk about the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Plan, which is an excellent plan, by the way, beautifully done. And what that means for the arts and culture community, the arts organizations, the cultural institutions in Sandpoint, and what are those components of the community that really make it feel like it has a sense of place. Like it is the cultural core of, or cultural hub of the region. We also talk about the urban forest, which is a really important component for Sandpoint specifically. We do not always have an urban forest component of these comprehensive plans, but with the Neighborhoods program, with the Tree Commission, with the clear importance of the community to have a robust urban forest and a healthy tree canopy locally, we wanted to make sure that that was represented in this plan. We talk about design guidelines in this chapter. We're referring back to what's already on the books with the community or the city zoning regulations. And we're also referencing some of those newer plans that also have some of those streetscape elements and recommendations for what that right-of-way should be looking like. So at this point, I think we've got 6 goals. And we're kind of breaking them down by topic. So goal 1 is about character and identity, really making sure that that sense of place is retained. So on the left side of the screen, you see the goal statement. On the right side, you'll see the objectives. And I want to point out on the top right, we have a couple icons here. And what we're trying to do is relate back these goals and the intent of this goals and objectives chapter back to the vision and those vision themes that I think Amy has workshopped with this group at your last session. And that aligns with the city's strategic plans. So these shouldn't be new concepts. We've been working with these kind of overall themes since 2019. And so we wanted to make sure that we're always looking back and making sure that these goals and these objectives are accomplishing and working toward that overall strategic and I guess strategic vision. So character and identity, this looks at the design standards, the cultural or the architectural standards, looking at different districts and how we can build on the historic integrity of certain areas, look at our scenic resources, and certainly E is implementing that arts, culture, and historic preservation plan, which is going to be a key component. Questions on how this goal or these objectives have been developed?
I just have a question. I don't know if it's now or later, but how do some of these goals and objectives get translated into code when we say we want an urban canopy? And I know that we have some code that addresses that, but do we ever see that being more robust as far as how these things might actually become code?
Yes, and so the piece that you're not seeing here tonight is chapter 12, which is implementation. And what we've kind of kept on the back burner throughout the whole process is a running list of what those actionable strategies look like. And a lot of that is looking at specific programming, specific zoning or regulatory updates, new studies or new plans that might need to be developed in order to implement these goals and objectives. So unfortunately, we don't have, since we're still working through the bulk of those chapters, we're not in a place where we want to share that with you quite yet, but absolutely, that is a key component of the comprehensive plan. We want to make sure it can be implemented. And so there will be a robust table in that chapter, which we had an example from the airport chapter that was updated, and I can pull it up on screen if you want, but it gets much more into the weeds of specific plans and regulatory updates.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Historic preservation. So the goal statement here is Sandpoint's areas of special historic interest and value are preserved and enhanced. And this has a number of probably the most objectives of all of our goal statements that we're sharing with you tonight. But that is because there is such an emphasis on historic preservation in Sandpoint. Certainly a lot of the public feedback that we heard was that, you know, a lot of these older neighborhoods, old and historic buildings downtown really are very cornerstone to the sense of community and sense of place of Sandpoint. So this aligns really closely with the historic preservation goals that were outlined in that arts, culture, and historic preservation plan. And maybe I'll call out F here, update the historic preservation ordinance. So that's one example of where you might see that reflected in that implementation chapter of how that preservation ordinance could or should be updated. Apologize, I cannot see your faces, so you're going to have to tell me if this is good or if I'm going too fast or if I should move on.
I think you're doing fine and dandy. Continue.
Okay. Please feel free to speak up if I am going too fast. All right, so we have a specific goal related to that urban forest that I spoke of, stating the health, diversity, and coverage of Sandpoint's tree canopy is maintained and increased throughout the community. So what that might look like in terms of those objectives is ensuring that our standards for new housing or new development includes tree plantings and preservation, that we're using best practices for planting trees in our urban areas, specifically when there might be conflicts with utility infrastructure or public safety. Trees can also be really useful with stormwater management and green infrastructure. So that's included here. And then mitigating that urban heat island effect, which I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that term. And certainly we can just define it in the plan. But that urban heat island effect is when you have a lot of very impervious pavement, concrete that is just reflecting heat from the sun up into homes, into buildings, into pedestrians, and it just kind of builds heat in the public sphere. So trees can help mitigate that, especially in parking lots.
Can I ask you a question while we're on that subject, a little more detailed on that one, I guess, and that's, I know of other communities that have put into code that black cannot be the color of your asphalt, and that it has to be a more reflective color. And I'm just curious if that's anything I can't imagine driving on a white road. It must be very bright, but I know that it's being done in places. I don't know how. What's your familiarity with that sort of code?
Yeah, it's the same as wanting to have white on top of commercial buildings. It's the same science, really, is to reflect light in a different way. That's a policy decision, and certainly something that can be codified. It's harder to do for roads that the city doesn't maintain or build, but for new subdivision regulations, that is certainly something that can be considered as a requirement for those builders.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Also, so the commission is aware there is also underway, and Maeve is heading it up, a urban forest management plan citywide. And I think we will be linking that within this part of the comprehensive plan as well. And Maeve, if you could maybe speak to, we anticipate that being done fairly soon?
Yes, so that plan, we're in the final rounds of the draft right now. We anticipate it being completed in September, and then we'll be presenting to City Council for adoption this fall. I anticipate September agenda, most likely, pending any significant changes to the draft. So we've done all of our legwork, and yeah, I think we're going to be ahead of schedule for this, so it shouldn't be a problem to incorporate that. Oh, I should also say, there's also the watershed recreation plan that's being done right now, and that is an appendix to the watershed management plan, which was adopted in 2021. And so that appendix item, the recreation plan, we just kicked that off, and it's probably not going to be done in advance and adopted in advance of the comp plan, but we will be far enough along to be able to reference that document.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question about the plan. Is this an actual tree maintenance plan?
It's Mr. Commissioner, it is a it is an urban forest management plan, and it's going to be as broad as looking at the trees that are in the watershed all the way through the entire forest. And we're considering the forest inclusive of the watershed and all of the trees within city boundaries.
But on this slide, it also includes trees in the city.
Exactly. Yes,
Okay.
yes, it's inclusive of.
My only question about that is because I think that history might show that we don't do a great job at managing the trees. So that was my question, because of the goal itself, the health and diversity and coverage of Sandpoint street canopy is maintained. Okay, I just need some clarification on that. I think that's a great idea. We're going to leave it up to Moses.
I have a piggyback on that one then, and that would be when you're talking about a urban forest management plan, which what I would include, I would say mitigating for insect damage and that sort of thing. Is it possible, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, but is that something the city can mandate it anyway of private landowners, that they also, part of the forest management plan is that they have to take care of their individual trees to prevent the spread of insect and or disease, as we kind of do already with noxious weeds? Can the same thing be done with pests of trees?
Mr. Chair, the current code does it does speak to any trees that are on public property. So for instance, in the right of way, the private landowner is responsible for taking care of any trees that fall within the parameter of their property that is on city property. It's kind of a nuanced way to think of it, but really in the right of way. Where we kind of cross the boundary, and you're asking about, can that code include private residential property? I'd have to defer actually to Amy for that, and would we have jurisdiction over private property? I would imagine no, but I don't know.
And I again, whatever your code, you could adopt a code that spoke to trees on private property, but I would maybe defer to Fonda on from a legal standpoint. Every community I've worked for, we very much regulate what's in the public realm, not on the private. So that's my experience.
Well, I know that, like, I mean, on private ground, you are required to take care of noxious weeds. I don't know if that's maybe a state ordinance and not a city ordinance. But I don't know if anything like that has ever been expanded to a forest management plan.
Good question. Again, I'm deferring.
Fonda, have any words of wisdom to add?
So you could not impose right now a directive on private landowners. What you could do is enact an ordinance to that effect should city council choose to do that. That would be imposed on future subdivisions in the form of requirements in their CCNRs and or zoning agreements or development agreements or anything like that, but you couldn't retroactively impose that on current landowners and restrictions right now.
And the kind of regulations we see that do that on private ground with weeds, is that more because it's a state mandate, not a city thing?
I wouldn't know without looking into it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions or continue?
Goal 4, arts and culture. Arts and culture are valued as expression of community character as well as an economic generator. And again, this aligns really well with the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Plan, so that those two plans speak to each other and strengthen each other. So this is looking at partnerships with existing institutions, facilities, looking at the evolution and creation of arts and creative districts in the community, expanding the existing public art program and what that looks like around town. The sustainable funding is always going to be an issue, I think, for implementation of these efforts. And then bringing kind of holistically providing opportunities for all ages to engage with our arts and culture and the creative atmosphere in Sandpoint. Creative community space. So that's looking at artistic space, workshop space, looking at kind of the needs for our creative, our creators in the community. And then really looking at downtown as that key to kind of the creative arts scenes. I think this is the last goal, which focuses on gateways and gathering places. So it states a unique and welcoming sense of community is provided through design elements at gateways within neighborhoods and special districts and throughout downtown and along major corridors. So this is really looking at those gateway features, streetscape kind of standards, design elements, unifying a look and feel for certain districts, and making sure that those are accessible, encouraging people to want to be in these places. So any questions on or comments, I guess, on these last two goals before we move on to another chapter?
Looks like we're ready to move on.
Okay. So multimodal transportation. This chapter relies heavily on the analysis and content of the Multimodal Transportation Master Plan that was recently adopted. So we've got some context up front about what the transportation system looks like in terms of right-of-way, sidewalks, paths, all of the modes of transportation. So the users of how you get around town. And here's that multimodal transportation plan, really relying on the direction and concepts that were built in that planning effort, which was, I will mention, done in tandem with the early phases of the comprehensive plan. We actually had a shared community choices workshop with that planning effort for the transportation plan. So a lot of these ideas were shared fluidly between those planning processes. Unfortunately, they got to finish, and our planning process gets to relook at it again. But we are relying heavily on kind of the foundation of that transportation plan. And so included in that transportation plan, they have some priority pedestrian and bicycle networks. So here's what that looks like. They also have some concepts around updating truck routes and corridor specific improvements. And so while this comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily get into those level of projects, we do want to make sure that our goals align with the overall intent of and goals and objectives even in that multimodal plan, so that we can all be working toward the same goals. And I will say there are many there are many transportation goals. So one part of the process that we worked through over the last few weeks is where we can delineate between operational goals that might have been appropriate for a master plan level scope. We might not need those in a comprehensive plan. So we have pulled back a little bit on what was completely included in that transportation master plan, trying to focus on those big picture directional goals and objectives instead of, again, the kind of more department specific operations and projects. So goal 1 here is to provide a balanced approach to mobility. So making sure access to business is efficient and residents and visitors alike benefit from a walkable and bikeable community. And among those objectives, we're looking at parking opportunities, safety and traffic circulation. We're looking at maintaining that network of what the plan calls perimeter routes for commercial and truck and bus traffic. So trying to reroute some of that heavier freight traffic. And again, clearly delineate truck traffic, limiting number of approaches to collectors and arterials. So looking at safety concerns between users, pedestrians, bicycles, and cars and trucks. Compliance on roadway access management. So how many turnoffs you can have on some of those major roads, and improving lighting for safety. So to build on that walkable and bikeable network, this goal states that there are multiple transportation options throughout the city and key corridors that enhance access between neighborhoods and key community destinations are prioritized. So this is really focusing again on that, the pedestrian network, the bicycle network, supporting safe routes to school programs, implementing those pedestrian bicycle maps that we just went through, looking at improved intersections and crossings. So, even raised crossings were necessary for improved safety. Looking at the region's system of trails and paths is really important as part of a walkable and bikeable community. And then maintaining the streetscapes for all modes. So looking at what we call a human scale. And so the feel of what a corridor or a path feels like for that pedestrian, and not necessarily for someone inside of a car, which is going by at a different speed. Goal 3 looks at a vibrant pedestrian-friendly downtown. And this might be a good moment to pause and say that there are going to be a lot of opportunities for cross-referencing throughout the plan. So a vibrant pedestrian-friendly downtown is certainly going to support our economic development goals, our land use goals. So what we've talked about is, especially in this age of a super digital comprehensive plan, you can hyperlink to different sections. You can make it very interactive and very user-friendly to be able to say, and look at these goals over here because they relate and they support each other. So this goal statement says that Sandpoint's vibrant pedestrian-friendly downtown is enhanced by the provision of accessible parking. So looking at specifically what it means to have an accessible and pedestrian-friendly downtown is still looking at how pedestrians get downtown. So looking at education, outreach, and opportunities to engage property owners and businesses to make sure that their out front is looking nice and encourages pedestrians to walk by, and then looking at what parking opportunities need to happen downtown. Are there any questions on this? I do recall, I know things have changed, but parking was a big topic a couple years ago. So I don't know if that was all worked out through the multimodal transportation plan, or if there's still some residual coordination or topics that we need to discuss about that.
There certainly still is improvement that needs to be made. One question that I've had on this too, and I know this was an issue that has been explored more directly. When we talk about accessible parking here, is the intent of that motorized? I know that in the past, bicycle parking has been a major issue, and I know that that was something that has been addressed in the past. And I'm wondering if that's worth being stated here, that we're talking about parking not just of motor vehicles, but also of bicycles. There's sometimes downtown, it's easier to find a place to park your car than to park your bike. That's for sure.
And Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There is also a downtown parking study underway. So they are assessing supply, demand, locations. I think that is focused on vehicular, not bicycle, but I will make sure to make the point that parking is not just motor vehicles, it's also
Right.
and scooters and.
Right, and that's, I mean, there's so many,
Motorcycles.
the line is not as clear as it used to be. But yeah, when you look at the rise of e-bikes and how common they are nowadays, are they motorized, not
Price of
motorized?
gas. People are more, you see a lot more of those.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And even in this town, with our outdoor vibe, it doesn't slow down all that much in the wintertime. People are on their bikes in the wintertime as well. Yeah.
Great comments. Thank you. So I'm going to run through the remaining transportation goals here. This one is about resilient, livable, and sustainable multimodal systems. So a safe, maintainable, and year-round transportation system is designed in context with the community and the environment. And that is one, I guess that plays right off that comment about how we need to have a year-round transportation system, and how bicycles still want to do their recreation, or if they bike to work as their mode year-round, we want to make sure that that is feasible. So related to that, it's, we have to think about the infrastructure needs, both present and future, to make sure that that can happen, the long-term functionality and maintenance of those right-of-ways, looking at upgrading transportation facilities as needed, especially as it relates to those really valuable historic, scenic, and cultural resources. Looking at improved street signage for safety and mobility. And that can also go along with other streetscape or landscaping standards for green stormwater infrastructure. Street and sidewalk standards. And again, you'll see that maintain and plant street trees. So this would be one where we want to reference that urban forest goal in the previous chapter. Goal 5 is about multimodal connections to the waterfront. So multimodal access to the lake, other waterfront areas, and associated public parks and open spaces are enhanced. And this would be potentially one we want to reference the Parks and Recreation, not only Parks and Recreation Master Plan, but our Parks and Recreation chapter, since there is a lot of synergy between that. So we're looking at making sure that these areas have access to transportation modes, that you have, you're planning in tandem with transit and bike and pedestrian facilities, and even non-motorized water modes. So boat access, canoe access as a transportation mode potentially. And then connecting those areas around town. Transit and passenger rail. The use of transit and passenger rail is supported and recognized as an ever increasingly important transportation option. Certainly, Sandpoint has grown around historically the access to the railroad, and that continues to be a mode that we want to support, especially with regional connectivity. So this is looking at ensuring the coordination with that passenger rail service and improving access to those that rail station by pedestrian, bike, and transit. Making sure that transit improvement and upgrades happen to encourage transit use. Partnering with the local transit authority to locate and I guess make sure that the transit system is efficient. And coordinating improved transit connectivity to our neighbors and Schweitzer Mountain Resort and other destinations regionally. So not only that people can come into Sandpoint, but they can also venture out and connect regionally. Goal 7, plan for an increase in demand. An increase in demands on the transportation network is planned for, and potential negative impacts to transportation facilities, corridors, and adjacent properties are minimized. So this is all about planning for the future and looking at making sure that development projects are planned in tandem with transportation and infrastructure needs, and that they meet standards. They're not putting a burden necessarily on existing infrastructure unduly, and continuing to assess that offsite traffic impacts for any new development. So as we grow, we still need to make sure that we're not burdening our infrastructure and our transit infrastructure needs. Goal 8. Yeah, I think this is the last one. All right. Inspire innovation and cooperation. Local and regional partners and stakeholders are actively engaged to address ongoing needs, functionality, and congestion through innovative and cooperative transportation strategies and improvements. This one, as the name states, inspire innovation is kind of an exciting goal in my mind, and really involves that partnerships, not just with other transit authorities or neighboring municipalities, but looking at making sure that planning for transportation and transportation projects in the future are bringing in public and stakeholder involvement too. But yeah, it's on both sides, right? So we still do want to coordinate with Idaho Transportation Department, other regional transportation efforts, and coordinating those multimodal transportation improvement projects with other city investments. So looking at internally how transportation investments will be coordinated between departments. And I guess the innovation comes into E as well, looking at all those new modes that might be popping up, electric powered or self-driving vehicles, new types of scooters. We still need to think about what might be coming down the pipeline that we'll start seeing new modes. So I know I ran through those, and I warned you there were a lot of goals on this chapter, but anything that stands out that we need to discuss?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
If I can go backward for a moment, in the 2009 plan, goal T3 was affordability. As I'm looking at these 8 goals of the projected update, considering from 2020 to current, our workforce is being decimated. So I'm wondering where that affordability piece, which the specific goal was to reduce household transportation costs, that coupled with our current fuel costs, I know is having a significant impact upon our workforce. So I was just curious, is that something that has been shelved, or where could we, to be specific, where can that be incorporated into this update?
Was that a question for me or the chair?
Well, it's through the chair to you as the author of this draft.
Wonderful, yes. So again, this was leaning heavily on the most recent multimodal transportation plan. And you're right, that plan did not really address transportation costs at the time. I think it would be an absolutely valid concern and a new topic to bring back into the table. One thing to consider is an analysis of what is it called? The basically analysis of destinations of point A to point B. So if people are coming into Sandpoint for work, but live outside of Sandpoint, versus commuters within Sandpoint itself, and who the goals and objectives in this plan can best serve. Certainly, we can look into that.
Thank you.
And piggybacking on that, I mean, another thing that is, I don't think I've seen it here in this document specifically mentioned, but I know that it's part of the multimodal transportation plan is working with other jurisdictions. Because when you talk about the employment of our residents, city boundaries mean nothing. They live in Ponderay, work in Sandpoint, vice versa. And so as far as that transportation, it certainly has to include all of those other jurisdictions.
If I could make a comment, I think that there was some reference to spot bus. It didn't specifically say expansion of routes or lanes. But that's essential to, moving people efficiently. And we've seen that little organization progress. Well, I mean, they're pretty good size now and provide a great service. So I don't know if it's the right place in this plan to, discuss provisions for expansion, but it does make sense. It just might not be the right place.
And maybe somebody here is more in the know than I on this, but it might also be an interesting thing when we talk about the spot bus. I know that in the past, some of their buses had bike racks on them and some did not. Is that still the case? Because it would certainly be beneficial if they all had bike racks on them so that people can take the spot bus close to their destination and finish it on their bicycle. And I don't know how
It would be super helpful if you could just jump on a UPS or FedEx truck that's delivering an Amazon product to your house.
the new drones that, are capable of transporting people. That's another option. One of those future things you said we should be planning for.
Absolutely.
Should we be planning for that?
Not in my tenure, I don't believe.
Sure.
Yes.
So I have more of like how are we expecting this document to be used? Who's going to use this document?
The comprehensive plan is an overarching policy document that gives direction to future ordinances, review of development proposals, programs are gonna, if there is an objective in here of partnering with local transit authority, it's, do we have a seat at the table? Are we trying to get more of a seat at the table, say, on the spot board? Or, so these are all just, these are very high level objectives, but those are looked to when we are developing ordinances. So I keep saying, when we want to get the comprehensive plan done before we make too many zoning changes, because we don't want to start nitpicking at something that then we have to redo after the comprehensive plan is done. So that is really who the user is. The other user is when people are looking at your community, they will look at the comprehensive plan because it's got a lot of data. It's showing the direction the community wants to go in. So those are really the big users of who reads this document.
Okay, thank you for that. I think my follow-on comment to that is that when you try to do a lot of things, you don't do anything well. And I feel that this is very comprehensive.
It's very.
There's a lot in here. Would it be better for us to focus in, like maybe have 3 goals per? Like, it's just a lot, right? I feel it's a lot to digest. And, you know, if I'm a developer or if I'm looking to do a project and I see all this, I kind of like gloss over a little bit. So just a perspective on it, right? Like, there's a lot there.
I would agree.
Yeah. I don't know how many pages is the comprehensive plan going to be once it's, you know, complete. I mean, this is what, 23 pages.
Well, this is the PowerPoint, you mean?
No,
Or
this,
that-
the document that was in the notes that we had,
Oh, so those, yeah, and that includes 3 chapters.
right?
So total, I think, Miriam, right now the plan is at 11 chapters? 11 or 12 chapters?
Right. Yeah, I think there are 9 topic chapters and 3 kind of background and implementation chapters. So 12 chapters total.
Okay,
It will be a large document.
it will be a large document. I just, again, when I see large documents that have a lot of information in them, the reality of them being able to be achieved, I don't know.
Well, remember, it's a 20-year vision.
Yeah.
And that is then reevaluated and looked at every 5 years for changing situations. But it tries to be as comprehensive as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I mean, if you took the old comprehensive plan, out of those goals, what were we able to accomplish?
Mr. Chair, may I add to that as well, please?
Please.
The other thing to remember is that the Local Land Use Planning Act requires us to have our comprehensive plan, and the information and data that is included in the comprehensive plan drives our master plans. And our master plans are what are required for us to have our capital improvement projects. And our capital improvement projects are necessary and required by Idaho code to allow us to charge impact fees. So all of this comprehensive plan is sort of the base, if you will, of the pyramid that drives all of the financial planning for the city. And when you have a city like Sandpoint that, as I've said before, is a full service city, unlike many others in our state, full service meaning we have our own utilities, we have our own police department, we manage our own roads, although we have IHD, that's a different situation, we still manage everything. When you have a full service city like the city of Sandpoint, you naturally are going to have a comprehensive plan that is much larger and more comprehensive than other cities that are not full service cities. But your comprehensive plan under the Local Land Use Planning Act is the foundation of all of the rest of your financial planning for the city and required to be there as that foundation.
Thank you.
If I may jump in on that, I am a planning consultant and I work with communities all over the Mountain West. Fonda's right that the Idaho in particular has a pretty robust requirement for how many topics you need to include in a comprehensive plan. I think there are 17. And you have to mention all of them. Other states are more flexible, and you might not need to get as comprehensive as 17 topics. Now that said, I have worked in other Idaho communities where we have worked with the structure of the plan to make it more user-friendly, more direct, and pulling by pulling out some of those existing conditions or kind of narrative contexts out into an appendix. And so that the meat of the plan really is a streamlined, this is what you need to know, this is the direction. And then if you want to learn about the background or where we got to, how we got to those goals and objectives, you can find it in an appendix, but that really shortens, the plan a little bit. So that, just to say, we don't have to do it the way that we did it before. If it does feel cumbersome in the way that it's structured, that is certainly something we can take a second look at.
And I would think part of that might be answered too, as you said, I believe you referred to it as chapter 14, which is the implementation. Is that, I don't know if I'm numbering it right, but when you talk about the implementation plan that comes at the end of this, that's where a lot of these golden objectives might become more concrete, they will become more concrete, more specific.
Right, that's where you'll see kind of your action plan of what are some of those easy implementation strategies to start working on to reach these goals.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I think that'd be a good approach.
And the unfortunate part, it sounds like that comes after all the rest of this. Because we need the base of our pyramid first, right? There we go.
The good news is that chapter 7 is next. And while this was also based on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, it only has 2 goals. So are we ready to keep moving on?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So we're talking about the context for Parks and Recreation. So we start the chapter with an overview of all the great parks we have in Sandpoint, the open space, the acreage we have in the Little Sand Creek watershed, the waterfront access. I mean, the list goes on in terms of all the wonderful recreation and open space amenities that Sandpoint has. And again, yes, we relied heavily on that recent Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This document is a little bit more, is a little bit different in that they go through a full analysis of some of those more specific park specific needs, and only have 2 kind of overarching, well, I take that back. I think they have 3 or 4 overarching goals. And again, we pared that back because some of that felt more operational and department specific. And we wanted to make sure that this comprehensive plan really did focus on that higher level base of the pyramid type comprehensive level. So the first goal is related to the parks and open space. So integrated and comprehensive parks and recreation facilities are provided to serve Sandpoint's needs. I apologize for the small font or the small font on your screen. I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, a dozen objectives that work toward achieving that goal. And again, this is all about parks and open space. The second goal is looking at recreation specifically. So the recreation programs and services are supported and approved and recognized as an important component of Sandpoint community life. So those are the 2 kind of overarching big themes that we have in this chapter. And I don't know if it's worth going back to read that fine print of those objectives in the Parks and Open Space goal. I certainly can. But this is aligning, again, this is aligning with the Parks and Open Space, Parks and Recreation Master Plan, in so much that we want to focus on the same priorities for new parks and maintaining the parks. And in that master plan, it goes into more specifics about new park design and new park concepts. Should I go into this more, or do we want to?
I have a
high level.
couple questions where we've been so far. Could you go back to that first slide of this part? And maybe I'm reading your map wrong, where it showed the parklands.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right there. Because it specifically mentions the Great Northern Disc Golf, but am I not seeing that on this?
No, so this was a quick reproduction of the maps that are included in that Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And it is included in the Parks Plan. It was not included in the GIS database that we have. So there are some of those improvements that we need to make on this map, certainly.
And then I have a second question. We talked about the acquisition of parklands, and this might be a Fonda question. Does Sandpoint have the authority to purchase land outside of the city limits for the purpose of city parks?
You could have the authority, but it's not recommended.
Okay,
And there would be a lot of layers that would have to go into approving something like that.
something like that. Yeah, clearly. But when we look at how Sandpoint itself is very little open space left inside of it, the only way to enhance park opportunities for our residents would for them to fall outside of the city limits. But
Well, I'll just leave it at, a city has the authority to purchase property that's not within its city boundaries.
gotcha. Is there more details that you all would like to go into? Are we okay on that part? Sounds like we're saying we're okay.
Well, then I think we can wrap up. Next steps, and Amy, if you want to jump in on any of this, I can run through the slide, or you can. It's
Sure, I will. We had talked about doing, back to the point of the engagement was done, then we had a pause. What has changed since then? And we wanted to go back and just do a survey on the vision statements that we've been working through that are in chapter 2. That survey is going to go live tonight. And that's going to be up for 2 weeks, and that'll be available on the website, Facebook page, and the Engage mobile app. So that will be one outreach, just to really, we're just trying to reaffirm that something dramatically hasn't changed with where we're headed as a community, where the community feels we're headed. And so then for your meeting next week, we are going to try and have review of 2 chapters. And these are both probably a little earlier in the draft phase than the ones we just reviewed, because again, we had master plans that we were pulling information from. But the drafts that we would like to review next week are chapter 8, which is public facilities and services, and chapter 11, natural resources and hazard areas. And then as of right now, and I don't have dates, but we will be doing additional workshops and, kind of, I think Miriam talked in the beginning about, we do, and I think the commission talked about this too, we do have these opposing views of different things. We want growth, but we don't want this kind of growth. So these workshops are going to be specific on housing and neighborhoods and land use, because those are the areas that we seem, obviously we have a lot of residential growth and we have a lot of change. And that's where people feel it is in their neighborhoods, and how land uses are changing. So those will be in the October, November timeframe. And we'll also just be plugging away on chapters and bringing those forward as they're available.
so with that is the conclusion of my PowerPoint. I'll stop sharing. And again, I really want to appreciate the Planning and Zoning Commission. It's wonderful to see you again, and I'm excited to be back. So thank you.
Good. And we do have a few questions. I don't know if they're for Miriam or city staff, but feel free.
Can we get the slide deck?
Oh, you can share that presentation with us.
Yes. We
Thank
have to.
Any other?
I have a question for staff or for Fonda. When we get into this deeper, like the what,
Most of you could bring in microphone.
when we get into topics that are in our own neighborhood, how do we handle that? Because there's some specific things that I think some of us live in areas where it could be I mean, we can have our own opinion, I know, but at what point is it kind of a conflict of interest?
Well, at
So,
the workshops, we're inviting the public, and what we'll have, it'll be an interactive workshop, but we're asking for their input. We're not, I mean, commissioners shouldn't necessarily be bringing up their specific issues at that point.
Where can we?
As we're drafting the chapter, so when we're going through and coming forward with, this is the direction of this chapter, that's the point, that if there's something specific that you would bring it up.
So it's not a hearing. And
No,
we're not
these are
here,
not hearings.
and we're not hearing on a topic that's directly specific to our own property.
Right.
But when we get into like possible zone changes or zone amendments or whatever, at some point, it will affect us directly. So where do we draw the line of where we're able to speak as an opinion about our specific property in the area that we're discussing?
the only way that would happen is if you adopt a future land use map or zoning designations that require a city-initiated zone text amendment and a change to your existing zoning map. So you won't even know, we won't even know if that's a possibility until you finish the chapters and then finalize your future land use map.
Okay, that helps.
But I think your question, and maybe Fonda, you can chime in, is it is going to be the land use. Is the land use that we currently have designated, maybe the land use that there should be, and that's where you may have a very strong opinion based on
Mhm.
your knowledge
Yeah.
of a neighborhood.
Yeah, and I guess it could be, I get hypothetically, a commissioner has a strong opinion about a certain neighborhood, maybe they live there, maybe they don't. But in the future, that becomes an advantage, or maybe not an advantage, but it changes something as far as a development possibility. If you're following me. Let's just say it's not where they live, but
These are still legislative decisions. These are not quasi judicial in the nature of, it's not an application for a specific parcel. These are still legislative decisions. You have a right to be in the community. You have a right to talk about it. You have a right to express opinion. If your opinion or your philosophy is such that you cannot be objective and neutral when it comes to adopting chapters or hearing public testimony on specific chapters of the comprehensive plan, then we would discuss that in the public meeting as to whether or not the feelings are so strong that you can't be objective and neutral. But these are legislative decisions. So you have a right to comment, you have a right to participate. You just want to be able to hear the public comment at the meeting and still be able to make an objective decision. So we would know more likely from all of you, because we know you well enough, that if there's going to be an opinion that's so strong that it prevents you from voting at a public hearing, we would know that well in advance. But I just can't anticipate that with a comprehensive plan, chapter by chapter adoption.
okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, do we have other questions for staff, presenter, comments? If not, are we ready to move on with our agenda items? That Just checking with Miriam. Thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a new business item. That is commissioner request for a code amendment. And requested by Commissioner Ahmet regarding an amendment to 9-1-8-B-5 of city code. And I will now yield the floor to Commissioner Ahmet to explain his request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. City Code 9-1-8 was updated, I don't know the timeline, from 650 feet to 900 square feet. And it currently restricts an accessory dwelling to 1 bedroom. And if you are aware of an accessory dwelling, 900 square feet is a large amount of space. And so what currently happens, whether we want to admit it or not, is we have a significant number of accessory dwellings that have an office that is a 2nd bedroom. The current county code is such that an accessory dwelling is 2 bedrooms, 900 square feet. So what I propose, and I have a motion that I'm prepared to put on the floor, is that we update the single word of 9-1-8 and correct the accessory dwelling regulation. And I'd like to be specific, and part of my motivation for this: one, I don't have a pecuniary interest at this time, but the number of ADUs that you see being put up in Sandpoint is significant. And it is one of the most direct ways that we can immediately have to address housing with our existing space within the city. There is an idea that we could wait until this entire update is done, but what that does is it encourages more non-conforming units, as well as it denies property owners and our workforce the opportunity, one, as a landlord to have some income, or two, as a worker to have space where you could have a small family that can be addressed with 1 word. So if there are any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them, Mr. Chairman, or I am also prepared to put a motion on the floor.
I'd like to comment if I may.
Yes, you certainly may.
Just based on personal experience, because I do have a ADU in the back of my property. And just I've had single people that have lived there. And I've also had a single mother with her 4-year-old son. And it is a 1 bedroom, almost 700 square feet ADU. And it was difficult for her. We had, a kitchen nook, and that's where she put her son's bed and whatnot. So it was not a bedroom. And for a landlord, especially for a single mother, watching a single mother struggle and make this space her own, and for her and her child, and this, cramped 700, not even 700 square feet. I do believe it would be beneficial to add the 2nd bedroom to that requirement for those purposes of small families who are just starting out, who do need the additional space for a child or 2. And the reality of, currently I have a couple in there right now. So if they were to have a child, they would still, need that space. So then you're thinking 2.5, 3 people in an accessory dwelling unit. I think it's sustainable for a space that is 900 square feet. So that is my opinion on this. I do appreciate the notion that you bring up, Commissioner, about, the need for such dwellings. I can imagine a 200 extra square feet in our ADU and how it would benefit, a small family, especially workforce families, in the community that are struggling to find inexpensive places to live in town.
My understanding, this is not talking about expanding square footage.
No.
No,
it's just a-
you had mentioned.
No.
200.
No, I was just mentioning,
Okay, yeah, it's not talking about square footage, it's talking about
I was
the
just
design
mentioning,
of that square footage,
right.
yes.
If I were to add 200 square feet to my, not even 700, it makes for a large bedroom. Or space.
And then we have a couple things. One is do we have further discussion on the topic? Then the other would be the process of how, if we were to want to pursue this, how we would go about that. Is there any general comments first on the objective of this?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
do we know why it's limited to one bedroom? What was the reasoning behind that in the beginning?
I believe, I was not here. Fonda, can you speak to that? I believe, well, what I understand is the size was increased, but the discussion was parking. And with one bedroom versus two bedrooms, would there be sufficient parking? Again, yes, the county allows 900 square feet. Parking is not an issue in the county. Parking is very much an issue in the neighborhoods in Sandpoint. I guess, I know this issue was brought forward before. We did also bring forward changes to accessory buildings. And that has just been put on the back burner, just given the workload that we have. So in terms of process, if this is something the commission wants to move forward, I guess you can make that motion. I can't guarantee how quickly this is going to move forward to city council,
Well, it requires a public hearing.
Right.
Yeah, so this proposed amendment would not be anything that we're acting on this evening. It would just be, is it something that rather than waiting for the discussion to happen, rather than waiting for the comprehensive plan to be more complete before we have the discussion, is this a particular item that, one, we feel is urgent enough, we should push it to the top of our crowded itinerary? And two, how would that impact then the development of the comprehensive plan? Is there anything, like you said before, is there anything we have to backtrack on? Is there anything that would make it not compatible or whatever?
And again, no one has said it has to wait till the comprehensive plan, but we had brought forward numerous changes that we feel need to happen to accessory buildings, because we have different regulations for garages versus ADUs or ADUs on garages. So just dealing with the one bedroom change it's something we could do, but it may have impacts that we did not consider. And every time we make a code change, there is an impact. So, we'll do whatever the commission direction is if you want to schedule a public hearing, but that.
My question for you,
We'd rather do it comprehensively. How are we dealing with accessory buildings?
and one question, then I'll get to you, but my question would be, you may not have the answer to this, but any estimate if we chose not to push this item to the top of our priority list, what kind of timing do we think it might realistically be before it does come up with a broader look at accessory dwelling units and other codes?
It would probably be with a couple months.
I think that's a few months before public hearing at planning and zoning. I know our public hearing docket in front of council is very full for the next couple months.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I put my name in to serve on this commission so that I could have an impact as a citizen. I have a motion I am prepared to put on the floor.
Okay. Please make the motion. Yep.
Mr. Chair, I move the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the Sandpoint City Council to amend City Code 9-1-8 accessory dwelling regulation B5 from 1 to 2 bedrooms as the maximum size.
Do we have discussion? We've had a little bit already. Any further discussion?
So I'm on the, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm on the codes, the city codes website here right now, and I see that it's under section C, number 4. Detached accessory dwelling units, detached accessory dwelling units must meet the following requirements. Bedrooms, the detached accessory dwelling shall be limited to 1 bedroom.
So you're saying the numbering may be not accurate here?
From the document I'm looking at.
Okay.
I guess my question and discussion point is, why do we need to be explicit about it in the first place? Like, if it's on the people's property and they're within the size requirements, whether they have 1, 2, 3, however they want to use it, like, why can't they use it the way they need to use it? I understand, and I think there was a good point about parking.
Yeah, maybe that may have
That's-
been.
that's-
Let me backtrack there 1 second too, because I don't believe I should have opened it up to discussion yet. And that is that we had a motion on it. And so is there a second for that motion before we have any more discussion?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. So now we'll have the discussion, if there is further discussion to have, pardon my,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
I'm on the same page with why do we need to designate a certain amount of bedrooms when, for one, we know that people are using 2 bedrooms and they're using an office or a study or whatever you want, whatever it's called as another bedroom, and maybe even a 3rd bedroom. And knowing that 900 square feet is probably enough for 3 bedroom, 2 bath. And I would venture to guess that there's some homes in Sandpoint that the primary dwelling has less square footage per bedroom on an average than what the accessory dwelling would have, even at 2 bedrooms, especially older houses. So I lean more towards, if we go to 2, then eventually it's going to be 3. And so why should we even go down that route? Because I think it's more dependent on site specific. If it supports parking in 2 or 3 or more bedrooms, or if the lot even can support a 900 square foot accessory dwelling. So that's my input.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, so when ADUs were brought into the ideology or the code of Sandpoint, there was some significant pushback, as into it was a change. And specifically to address Commissioner Dunkel and Commissioner Benz, because I forgot your last name, sorry. I specifically crafted this motion so that it would also, as we are looking forward with planning, if we were to consider annexing areas, which considering the ACI, which is part of an ongoing conversation, that we would be in compliance, or not compliance, but that we would be simpatico with existing county code. And the parking conversation is real. And that's why I have limited it to the 2 bedroom piece.
Go ahead.
When you stop to consider this normal size of a bedroom in a 2,500 square foot house is 11 by 12, 10 by 10 and a smaller, it does make sense. But when the builder or the property owner puts it into plan, the plan needs to be approved. If the parking, if the builder, not builder, but property owner has the parking, I don't see an issue with it. But I do understand the parking requirements, and it's important. I certainly don't want to stand in front of our goals for higher density. It makes sense, but doesn't this become a presentation and approval of plan?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, when somebody builds an ADU, they have to submit plans.
Right.
So you have to meet the criteria. If a person were to put in for 2 or 3 bedrooms and they have the space to park, it's a non-issue.
An ADU is not required to have parking currently.
I guess, go ahead.
I think 1 parking stall is required.
1.
The comment I was going to make is that when we look at, increasing density, when somebody comes forward with any kind of application where density is going to increase, there is a lot of other hoops they have to go through besides just increasing density. And that's where I see the potential fallback of this, and particularly when you say if there would be no mention of any number of bedrooms and somebody puts an accessory dwelling unit and they have 4 bedrooms with bunk beds, and all of a sudden we've quintupled the density of that neighborhood. That's going to be a mess, not just with parking, but with other things as well. But so my point being is that I don't think it's as simple as changing 1 to 2 bedrooms, because there'd be all sorts of other things that would have to incorporate with that address the issues of parking, perhaps even that address the issues of infrastructure, depending upon if there's multiple ADUs going, as we've seen in some of the developments in town. But so I think there needs to be something there. I'm not saying it has to be 1 or there has to be 2, but there has to be something in my permit. Yes.
Chairman. Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but for a lot, you can only cover 35% with dwellings in town.
Coverage, correct.
Yes. So, I mean, there couldn't be multiple, again, when you go to the plant, to city for planning and you give them their plans, I mean, you guys check for that sort of thing. If I give you a plan and I only have a 5,000 square foot lot and I want to put, multiple dwellings, garages, sheds, an ADU, I have a limit.
You have a limit.
So I don't think we would run into that problem with what we have currently in city code. I think the question of an additional bedroom negates the fact of those other concerns when we do have that in code. Correct?
If you already have a structure and you're within your allowable lot coverage, no, the bedroom will not change that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
What if there was an avenue for a conditional use permit for more than 1 bedroom? Because I believe there isn't now, because it's just capped at 1.
Correct.
And I'm not trying to interrupt, but if somebody wanted, would that be a conditional use permit or would that be a variance if someone were to want to request a 2-bedroom ADU?
It would not reach a variance threshold, but if the commission wanted to allow it through the conditional use permit process, that could be a change. So,
But the motion on the floor,
Pardon?
is to send this request to council to see if council wants to direct staff to draft a code text amendment and send it back to planning and zoning for a public hearing. Because it has to have 2 public hearings. You have to have a public hearing in front of planning and zoning and a public hearing in front of council.
Correct.
Let's vote.
So my point, well, I guess the other discussion I would say is that this issue is something that will be addressed. Timing is something we're not certain of because of the amount of workload that we are seeing, both for city council, ourselves, but then also city staff. So do we want to proceed with pushing this to the top of the agenda, or?
Mr. Chair, I guess the one comment that I have on that is that I haven't seen us been able to move like fast or actively on, I guess, anything that would benefit the broader community. So I would be supportive in that, because to the point of why are we here? Let's do something. I think that this is actually doing something in that direction. But I don't think that we should limit it to, I think it's better for us to have it broader than be specific, but that's my opinion.
Okay, do we have any other discussion? Okay, so are we prepared? And again, remind me exactly of, you don't have to read the motion again, but this motion is to take the idea of changing just the simple words one bedroom to two bedroom, and to ask city council to consider that. And then it would go through the normal process with public hearings.
1 bedroom to 2 bedroom on 900 square feet.
Right. The only thing that changes is the number of bedrooms at this point. Okay.
We had a second.
Sorry, not a second.
We had a second. Yes, it was you, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
Oh, you, okay, never mind. Yes, so we are ready. We're at the position where it's time to take a vote. Are we ready to do that? Would you like to?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
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 okay. The motion passes. With no further business before the commission, this meeting is now adjourned at 7:05 PM. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.